Civilization is upheld by many intangible things, and one of its most fundamental supports is also one of the most primitive. On nothing more substantial than a column of air, reaching from the lungs to the lips and set in vibration by the vocal cords, the fabric of our daily lives is reared. Without this invisible prop, which we call the power of speech, the structure of life as we know it would crumble, business would falter, the familiar routine of the housewife would halt, and between parent and child there would be only silence.
Yet it does happen sometimes that disease, injury, or operation impairs the power of speech, or even destroys it altogether. Speech in human beings depends on two things. Firstly, the voice box or larynx, which produces sound, and secondly, the palate, tongue, cheeks, teeth, and lips, which mold the sound into speech. The molders by themselves hardly produce any sound. The larynx is a box-like structure of cartilage, lying in the neck behind the Adam's apple and forming part of the air passage from the lungs. Across the larynx are stretched the vocal cords. Sound is produced when these are set in vibration by air flowing up the trachea or windpipe from the lungs. A few moments ago you saw some people in ordinary everyday scenes. A businessman in his office, a housewife shopping, and so on. They appeared quite normal and were all in situations in which speech is required. Yet not one of those people has a larynx or vocal cords. Since they can speak, evidently some alternative source of sound has been discovered. Behind the windpipe lies the gullet or esophagus, the food channel. When food is swallowed, the epiglottis helps to prevent it from entering the windpipe. When the larynx is removed by surgical operation, the trachea is diverted to an opening in the front of the neck called a tracheostome. This serves for breathing through, but it can take no part in producing voice, as it is entirely cut off from the mouth. The gullet, however, still communicates with the mouth, and it so happens that it can produce sound, as when air or gases escape from the stomach in bursion. Then the narrow upper part of the esophagus acts like a false larynx, and if this sound can be made at will, there is no reason why it should not be molded into speech. This can be done, and it is this esophageal speech which our friends in the earlier part of the film were using. They were swallowing air into the esophagus and then regurgitating it to produce sound. Get Mr. Duffy on the phone, please. Learning to speak in this new way takes time, of course, and the patient's training should commence even before his operation. If he can learn to swallow air and regurgitate it at will, his chances of acquiring a good voice afterwards will be greatly increased. Is that Mr. Duffy?
It is, Doctor.
Could you find time to come to the club this evening and show us how well you can speak?
I think so, Doctor. If anyone wants to hear me.
I can guarantee you an audience. How are you getting along?
Very well indeed. This morning I give a demonstration lasting an hour, so I think I should be in good practice.
Good evening.
Good evening, Doctor.
All keeping well?
Very well, thank you.
I hear you were at Wembley lately. Were you pleased with the result? Well, Mrs. Brannan, are you managing your shopping quite well?
Yes, without any trouble.
Have you seen your daughter in London lately?
Yes, she was here in holiday, and it's just all right.
Well, Mr. Graham, I understand you've got a dog.
Yes, the Joe.
How do you call him from a distance?
Oh, I whistle for him.
How do you manage that?
Oh, just like this.
My goodness, that's wonderful. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Are you still church treasurer?
Yes, as I went to the pool at the last week.
Very good. Are you back at your old occupation?
Back at the button.
You should use your voice a little oftener. Are you putting in plenty of practice, Mr. Ferguson? How long is it now your operation, Mr. Barry?
Almost 5 years now.
Ah, here's Mr. Duffy. Good evening, Mr. Duffy.
Good evening, Doctor.
Will you please sit down?
Thank you.
Now, could you just tell us how you went about learning this new way of speaking?
Certainly, Doctor. I was able to begin my training under the supervision of Mr McAllister, who had been operated on 2 years previously, and used his esophageal voice very well. Hearing him speak gave me greater confidence, and under his instruction, I learned to swallow air and produce sounds in my gullet.
Now, close your lips and swallow air into your gullet as Mr. McAllister showed you, and return it as noisily as possible. That was very good, wasn't it?
On the 8th day after the operation, when my nasal feeding tube was removed, up to 10, 11, 8, 9, 10.
There, you can actually speak. Very soon he'll be able to do without his writing pad, sister.
I'm sure he will.
Great. Through continuous practice in the forming of words, I was able to listen. 2.5 months after my operation, I dispensed entirely with my writing pad, and was able to drive my car on a journey to the north of Scotland. And I spoke to my wife on the telephone every night. Next month, we are putting on the market a small machineless clamp unit. I am sending you a dozen to try out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duffy. We'll be seeing you on your next journey then. Goodbye.
Bye. Since then, I have had no difficulty in carrying on my business, and as time goes on, I find I am still improving. As a matter of fact, many of my customers do not know I have no voice box, and often ask me if I have laryngitis.
Yes, Mr. Duffy. No doubt you are doing very well. But what about our friend Mr. Daly over here? He has much more difficult conditions to contend with than you have. Come and let us have a word with him. I understand your line is engineering, Mr. Daly.
Yes, Doctor, that is correct. I'm in charge of the printing shop in our works.
And even in these noisy surroundings, you can make yourself heard.
Yes, it took some practice and perseverance, of course. I began with reading bedtime stories to my little boy. Then, when I went back to work, I always made a point of doing the reading when there were lists of wages to be checked, and that sort of thing, which was very good practice. And soon I was able to carry on conversation, even in the fitting shop, in spite of the noise, the machinery, and all the usual hammering and grinding that goes on in a factory. I can speak on the words telephone too. In fact, I go about my business very much as I did for my operation, and I'm still improving. I owe a great deal to the club members here, Mr. Duffy included. Their help has been of great value and was willingly given.
I agree with all you say, Mr. Daly, and with the example of the other club members before. No one should fail to develop useful voice.
If we can do it, so can they.
Quite so.
That seems a very good note to end on.